Okay, welcome. Good evening, everyone. Please take a seat. We're going to begin. I'm Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of Devex. I really want to give you a warm welcome. Thank you for that. I love the energy in the room. Davos is a big maze of places, and this is the room for people who really care about global health, who care about saving the lives of women, of mothers, of children. And this is one of those areas, one of those bright spots where there's been a lot of great progress. So this is going to be a fantastic event to talk about how we go to the next step, how we get further. I want to especially welcome all of the people joining us from around the world. We've got global health professionals, development leaders from all over the world who can't be here in Davos but are tuning into this live streamed event. And we want to welcome them. We're looking for you on social media for your thoughts, your comments, and you certainly are going to help inform the event today, as you'll hear in just a moment. So I want to tell you a little bit of backstory, especially for those who aren't here in Davos. This is a big year. This is the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum. It's also the 20th anniversary of Gavi, the vaccine initiative, which was launched here. So it's kind of a moment of a lot of introspection. People are asking, sort of, what are we doing as a group? What is our reason for being? What's the future going to hold? It's, of course, also 2020 is 10 years out from the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Are we going to get there? Particularly when you think of the areas that many people in this room work directly on, maternal mortality, had a lot of progress, 37% fewer deaths since 2000. But to stay on track to hit the goals, it's 7.5% that we need to see a decline, 7.5% each year until 2030. Frankly, we are not on track to do that. What we're facing now are some of the most challenging situations in the world. We're going to talk today about how we can unlock the potential to get there. So what do we do in a moment like this when we're faced with a big milestone year? It's a little bit like when you turn 40, maybe, and you have a choice. Do you want to have a midlife crisis, go out and do very silly things? What's the age you want to make it, Tara? I'm already there, by the way. I'm on the other side, but I'll take it. Or do we want to not have that midlife crisis, but try to make some smart choices about the future? Try to figure out what can we do a little bit differently and be a little introspective. So where are we going wrong as a global health community? And that's something that Merck for Mothers, MSD for Mothers, is known here in Europe, and Devex partnered together on with other partners for the last few years to say, how can we get some tangible change? How can we kind of reboot the conversation? Everybody agrees this is an important issue. What do we do to actually unlock the potential of saving all of those lives by 2030? And the good news is, this is not the first time we're having this conversation. We had this meeting in Davos last year. We've done this twice at the UN General Assembly. And every time we've taken it a step forward, a step forward, and a step forward. And in fact, just a couple of months ago, we launched a new report called Partners for Progress. And in this report, we did a survey. Many of the people who are on the live stream today may have been a part of that. We interviewed 500 development professionals, health professionals who work directly in RMN-ACH around the world. And we asked them, what should we do? Where do we stand? And what's interesting is there's not actually a lot of controversy. 90% of the 500 professionals who work on these issues every single day that we spoke to said that we need private sector engagement. In fact, it's essential to achieving these goals. 90% said that the financing system we have today lacks predictability and sustainability. So what we have been on a mission to do, together with partners, including at today's event, the DFC, the new DFC, which we can applaud if you want, even though they're not here in their absentia, and with Credit Suisse, our real goal with partners is to say, let's find some tangible examples of what's working and try to lift those up and see if there's some more rapid systemic change we can make as a global health community. I think we're on a great path there. So thanks for being part of this discussion today. We're going to jump into a panel discussion. We are then going to hear from folks in the crowd. We're going to have an amazing intervention, a one-on-one conversation a minute after that. It's going to be a very dynamic hour, and we want your involvement in that. So please stay engaged with us online and in the room. Okay, so who do I have next to me? My great partner, Dr. Marianne Etiabet, who's the lead and executive director of MSD for Mothers. She has been committed to these issues since you were a medical doctor, your whole career, and is a real thought leader on these and kind of pushing all of us forward all the time. I hope you're going to do a little more of that today. Next to her is Dana Barsky, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Head of External Partnerships for Impact Advisory and Finance.
There's that partnerships.
At Credit Suisse. It's a mouthful, but yes, it is partnerships. And you've got that fantastic bejeweled SDG pin, which And then Tara Nathan, who has been a partner in crime for me for a long time now in the humanitarian space, and is known for always speaking truth wherever you go, even at places like Davos. So excited to hear from you, and you are, especially at places like Davos, you are the Executive Vice President for Humanitarian and Development at MasterCard. So let me just kind of throw it open to get us started. As I said in the beginning, we know a lot of what works. A lot of the groundwork has been laid. So what's missing from your perspective, Marianne? What's missing in the conversation?
What's missing is scale and sustainability. And that's what this partnership has been around, the Moms Initiative. When people talk about how do we involve private sector in a real way, I think a lot of times they stop around the funding and the financing. But we know that private sector can bring more than just private capital. What it can bring is innovation and sustainability, because the innovators, the entrepreneurs, with their business models, that's what's going to create revenue that can be plowed back into the system and can make sure that these innovations are sustainable and can scale.
I think having Credit Suisse and MasterCard here is just a visible, view of that, right? This is exactly what we're looking for. Not necessarily just global health organizations are in part of this tent. So give us a sense, maybe starting with you, Dana. When you think about the global health space and the financing opportunities, especially from the private side, what are they? How do they look to you?
Well, they're actually quite extensive if you are looking at kind of your typical healthcare financing, hospitals, pharmaceutical delivery. The reason this partnership is so interesting and needed to be done is that certain health issues, such as maternal health, is not available, is not investable at scale. And so what we needed to do for this project is bring together different partners who could help at different levels of the capital structure, from philanthropic grant capital all the way through to maybe concessionary or senior financing in our case. And that's what's so needed in those areas in particular that can't be solved at scale at this point in time.
This is what everybody refers to as blended finance,
Blended
right?
finance,
Which everybody says, no one really fully understands. But you
Happy to
explained it very
elaborate
well.
on it later.
And just to add something around this, because when people talk about blended finance or innovative financing, the buzzwords, part of what this partnership did was not to create a new financing vehicle, but to actually figure out how to structure the deal to meet the need. And so that having 3 different partners in the pod really allows flexibility around the structuring.
Now let's just take a step back and say, what is that Moms Initiative? I know many people know it well, but what is it exactly, Marianne?
So the Moms Initiative is, the acronym we cooked up to describe our alliance. And it's actually exciting.
Which stands for maternal outcomes matter.
Thank you. And I'm glad you reminded me of that, because
you say it so much that you don't even...
When we're talking about scale, we're talking about impact at scale, not just growth at scale. And one of the things that I'm actually concerned about with a lot of the new private capital coming into this space is that we are not going to accurately be able to measure impact. We may not have the right metrics. And so having this alliance really focus on outcomes is how we're hoping to drive the right capital to the right place to have the right outcome.
And that is not the norm, as many of you know, in our sector. Very often we throw out these very high-level numbers, and we don't say, is China included in that statistic? Is India in that statistic? Is it middle income and low income? So focusing on the outcome first is a pretty big innovation in and of itself. I want to get you, Tara, into the discussion. So people might be asking, why MasterCard? Of course, I know, because we've been working together a while. But what is your view, sitting at MasterCard, about the role of private sector models in a field like global health?
Great question. Thank you for inviting me here to speak. So what's interesting, why MasterCard? It was a conversation I just started before the beginning of the panel. I sit within MasterCard, the corporate, not the foundation, and not the CSR team. So very interesting to see this panel and meet Dana and see others when we talk about public-private partnership. There's private sector and then there's private sector, right? So bringing your public policy guy along or your government relations person along or your CSR person is not private sector, right? What we do, I think, is private sector. So that's really, I think.
And what you're referring to there is
informative.
kind of bringing the mainstream core of the business against these big
Exactly
global
right,
challenges.
exactly right. Because if you're going to go back to the point that was made about scalability, scalability will happen through your core business, right? There's only so many philanthropic dollars to go around. And, you know, a woman on my team coined a brilliant phrase that I steal shamelessly now. She says, you know, what happens when the grant runs out? And I love that concept. What happens when the grant runs out? And that's where, to me, scalable private sector steps in. What do we do, and what's our role, and why MasterCard in this space? So we're a digital payments company. That's how perhaps you know us. We create global networks, digital infrastructure that enables your payments to happen seamlessly across the globe. What we've done is taken that expertise and applied it to the development world and community and said, but we need to adapt it. It needs to be able to work offline and online. It needs to work to enable transactions that are not payment transactions. Because for our constituents, those living on sort of $1 or $2 a day, they are not necessarily making, they're not making $100 purchases at Macy's. What they are doing, though, is bringing their children to get vaccinated. They're sending their children to school, and they have to make 50-cent transactions to a school that's a 3-hour walk away. They are smallholder farmers, and they need to post their avocados onto a marketplace such that they can get access to large agri-buyers. So that's what we're doing.
I mean, financial inclusion is the key to everything from education to employment. It's just really just the core of all impact.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great opportunity to get back to your pin, if we can.
Oh, sure, okay.
Because when the SDGs came out, there was a lot of complaint that they're so complicated, right? There's so many of them. But in the end, these are very systemic issues, and they're all quite connected. So as we're going to hear about later in the discussion today, if you want to support a small local entrepreneur doing a health innovation in a market, you kind of need the financial inclusion piece. It doesn't work if their customers don't have access to mobile money. So these things are all ultimately connected.
And they're all very much linked. In fact, we've done a study linking them. But I work across all the Sustainable Development Goals, or I should say I try. Some are easier than others. Just briefly talk about what I do in the private sector. So I'm in a very special group at Credit Suisse called Impact Advisory and Finance Department. And we have the incredible mandate of trying to bring private capital to solve each of these Sustainable Development Goals. And what we're really trying to do, and it's hard, we're getting there, is create investable opportunities for our clients, being private banking clients or corporate clients or institutional clients, to invest along each of these Sustainable Development Goals, from healthcare to gender to education to financial inclusion, and across asset class too, from early stage businesses all the way through to senior debt opportunities or private equity as well. And so this partnership is really just one piece of that broader offering, which our clients really like because they want to have different opportunities available to them.
So maybe any of you can give me a sense of where you think we stand on the transition, the financing transition I think you're referring to here. So the old model we had, Tara referred to it too, was kind of a donor-recipient model, right? And not that we need less aid money. We probably need a lot more, according to lots of the people we speak to in global health who are out there campaigning for more aid. But in addition to that, we need new ways of doing this. Even people like the Secretary General of the UN, who I've interviewed, says, he's a former head of the Socialist Party in his country, we need the private sector deeply engaged in the SDGs. So the question I have is this transition to a new model that has philanthropic dollars, aid dollars, that has high-risk capital, that has pension fund money that might not be willing to take a big risk, that has the whole spread. Where are we in that transition? How would you describe it? Any of you, I think you want to go ahead.
I mean, I think we are so early on. I liken it to the Gordon Gekko phone, the mobile phone, like that. That's kind of where we are. You know, one of the things Merck from others wants to do is to be catalytic in this space and take the risk and put in the sweat equity, because to develop these new vehicles, these new mechanisms, it hasn't been done before. Some of them take 18 months to actually structure. We can't wait for that.
It does take time.
Yeah, the development impact bonds, which we have experience with. And so looking back on that experience, we said we don't have time to repeat that. We don't have another 18 months. And so we need to think about bringing in folks who know how to structure deals from the get-go, so that that timeline is truncated and we can reduce the transaction costs. The other thing I want to talk about with regards to transaction costs is making sure we are linking the right type of money to the right innovation, and not distorting the market. And one of the things that we hope the Moms Initiative can do, and we'll be releasing a call for business proposals. I think it's already released. It's past 5 o'clock. Is to crowdsource these innovations and help link them to investors, because what we hear from entrepreneurs is they are spending a lot of time and energy and resource knocking on lots of different doors. And so we hope we can actually create a marketplace to match entrepreneurs to financing.
Is that where you see the problem? It's kind of chicken or egg? Is it that there isn't enough money ready to chase after impact finance in the health space? Because you certainly hear lots of millennials that say we want to invest there.
I mean, I guess there's.
Or is it deals?
Well, I guess one thing, though, just to go back to what Marianne said, I actually think, I agree, we're in the nascent stage, but if you look at what we've accomplished the last year, it's really amazing. I mean, I think the tide has turned. I think the trend is coming, and I think it's coming fast and furious. We can't keep up. And I'll get to your question, too, but another really interesting thing that we're seeing is that you used to have philanthropy over here, and used to have traditional investing over here. And then impact investing came along, and more people are really curious about it. I can invest with impact and still get a market return. We say, yeah, you can. So you can take your philanthropic dollars and you can move it in impact investing, and you could do that positive impact over and over and over again. Or you can take your traditional investing and take a chance and just try it a little bit. And another saying that I steal that someone said before, which I really like, which is, come for the returns, but stay for the impact. Because once someone sees an interesting project that has good returns, and then they see the impact, they love it. Exactly, they love it. And so then to your last question, which
the chicken or the egg.
The
but
chicken
by the way,
or the
on
egg.
returns, we have a story of returns in the audience we'll go to in a second.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, look, I often hear the projects are not available. At Credit Suisse, we have 40,000 employees. We have a very broad network. I often find very high quality deals. They come to me, frankly, but they're generally of size. And so again, to this project, what I don't see, what I unfortunately don't have time to see, and why the partnership is so helpful, because they help look and develop the pipeline, which is the smaller deals that a large institution, I can't necessarily take the time to analyze one by one to find such fabulous, fabulous companies as you'll hear about later today.
Yeah, back kind of to Tara's point, there's private sector and private sector. There's also the big private sector and the local private sector. And a lot of what we're talking about when we say private sector is not the big corporations that are here on the stage, but the small, nascent startups that are so critical to building these local ecosystems.
I think also one point that I might want to make is when we talk about financing and we talk about commerciality, we have a tendency to focus on investment dollars and driving investment dollars, sort of into investable deals. Is there a dearth of funding or deals? What I find is that there is a dearth of commercial models. And that's what we spend a lot of time, at least at MasterCard, trying to figure out. Because it is very complex to do this in a commercially sustainable manner when you're trying to extend services to the most marginalized. Because think about it. We're spending millions, probably tens. I would never admit that in front of my CEO, but more, hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's being recorded, but
not a lot of money. Not a lot of money. Being, spent on investment to build this infrastructure. It's to serve a community who won't pay for it, can't pay for it. We don't want them to pay for it. You have donors, who are funding governments who then have to contract with us. It's a complicated ecosystem, folks. The people with the expertise are different than the people who are innovating, are different than the people who are receiving the service, who are different from the customers. So ideally, at the end state, you have a government as a customer, but the government is going to expect a handout, is going to expect a donor dollar to try and fund that. So I think the more energy we can spend on developing out those commercial models, I think would be well served.
Yeah,
And then those would produce the investable deals for the investors.
And part of what Merck for Mothers, MSD for Mothers can bring to the table is helping with the development of that business model for some of our early innovators that are not ready to receive private capital. The other partner in this initiative,
I was just going to say, we should talk about the DFC as well.
That's not here, is, you know, we kind of visioned, dreamed up this partnership with Catherine Kaufman, who led the Women's Health Initiative at OPIC. OPIC has now transitioned into the $60 billion US Development Finance Corporation. And I think part of that process and part of that spirit of experimentation is we knew that OPIC did large infrastructure deals. And for any of you who are involved in maternal health, you know, one of the things that I always say is it's not just a vital sign of the health system, it's a vital sign of the society. And all of the non-health upstream drivers of maternal mortality, we need to figure out how to fix. And we thought that OPIC could bring that experience in helping to address, you know, whether it's transportation, whether it's power, whether it's sanitation, could help us think about how to invest in that. And they don't really, or they had not had a very large health portfolio. So this was their experimentation into health. And it's really exciting to see that they're now making it, you know, kind of quite a important priority area, you know, as they're moving into the DFC. And if I can remember the paraphrase, but I just got a text, you know, from the team there. And one of the things Katie has said is, you know, her team, Dia, who has, you know, visited Nigeria, done all the due diligence, being able to tell within the organization that this is the most meaningful deal that she has structured. To your point about staying for the impact is important.
And I know you're all Devex readers, so you very well know what the DFC is, but just in case, I'm going to tell you, it is the International Development Finance Corporation, which is the successor to OPIC. They call it DFC.
Yeah,
they don't,
not IFC.
The acronym is not, but the I is actually in there in the legislation, I believe.
It is.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
confusingly. But it is basically the first time the United States government has had a full-fledged development finance institution that has all the abilities to loan money to companies or to invest directly in companies and funds. It's much larger now in its new incarnation, and it also happens to be headed by someone who comes from the global health or the health space, at least. So their focus is starting to shift. We miss them here. We wish they could be here, but of course the U.S. delegation wasn't that big. So, but they're a key partner of this event and of this initiative.
And the fourth partner that's not here, USAID. And part of what they're bringing to the table with their Center for Innovation and Impact is technical capacity building for innovators, for entrepreneurs, and figuring out how to link that innovation to a delivery system. Again, thinking about impact and thinking about scale.
So Tara, Nathan, I know you have to go.
Okay.
And it's not because your CEO is calling you.
No,
yeah.
I just got a text, he heard what I said.
Any final words of wisdom you want to throw out before you go?
No, I mean, just final, I just think we are really excited about participating in this. We're very excited about now potentially being a part of even the Merck for Mothers and the Moms type of initiative. For us, I do think it's about how can digital infrastructure provide better access to services for those in the most marginalized communities? How can it provide, I think what was interesting, we didn't touch on it much, a lot of the data accountability, reporting, outcomes. We can, through digital identity, start to, in the most secure manner, because when you start to talk about data and vaccination data, immunization data, it becomes very sensitive. We have to be very careful about every Tom, Dick, and Harry who comes up to you and says that they've got a health app. Anytime anyone says they have a technology solution for you in this space, we need to be very mindful of data privacy, data security, and all these things. And so that's what we obviously at MasterCard spend a lot of money on and time. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Tara. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
So we're going to go to all of you in just a moment. I want to hear more, especially I want you to push back on us a little. What are we missing? What are some of the places you think there needs to be more urgency or more focus. But just coming back to the panel, if I can for a second, I think it was literally in this room, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that your CEO was here announcing MSD's commitment to the GFF, the Global Financing Facility. That's another piece of the picture here, and it was referred to a little bit, Tara referred to it a little bit, the transition from low-income countries starting to get to a point, their economy is growing enough that they ought to be able to invest more in health, and that this is a facility meant to help bridge that gap. So how do you see that going today? Are countries, as they're getting to that right stage, starting to invest more in health? Is the picture broadly positive? Is there a long way to go? How do you see that dynamic?
So, and Dana, thank you for being glass half full as opposed to glass half empty.
Depends on the region, though, but yeah.
But, I think, we have tried many different ways to tackle this issue of how can we have meaningful private sector contributions to have global health impact. And one of the ways that we have thought about it is linking with large institutional structures. I often call GFF and World Bank our on-ramp to sustainability and scale, because they are linked to institutional structures in governments, whether it's Ministry of Health and, more importantly, Ministry of Finance, to make sure that these interventions are prioritized in the budget and are funded. But to your question around, the experience there, we, sitting at the table, have really been able to advance meaningful private sector in-country collaboration. Ethiopia did a whole analysis of where were the opportunities that they were leaving on the table by not including private sector. And the great thing about GFF, with all of the countries that are part of that network, the analysis that Ethiopia did is accessible, available to all of the other GFF countries. And so again, in that way, we're able to reduce transaction costs for spread.
I would say, and it's a risk to use numbers on a recorded panel, but roughly, in the developed world, governments are spending about 10% on GDP on healthcare. Tell me if I'm wrong. In the developing world, it's often as low as 2%, because they can't afford more. And 2% is just not going to cut it. So you have to have the private sector step in here to solve this, or it's just not going to work.
Yeah, in many of the countries at the lowest end of the income scale, the annual spend, per person on health, is $50 to $250. So the gap is so massive. Now, in the particular area we're talking about, it's often called a $33 billion gap, right, for maternal and newborn, adolescent child health. That's a big gap in a way. In another sense, it's not that big at all, actually. That in financial terms, right, when you think of the amount of assets that are out there chasing investments, it's not that big of a gap if you can make that investable, which is not a small thing to do. We have Natalia Kanem here. You all know her as the executive director of the UN Population Fund, one of the highest ranking women at the United Nations. We'd love to just get your take on the discussion so far, Natalia. Tell us what we're missing and your views.
Well, this is quite exciting, and I find it very encouraging to think about how we're weaving the very real possibility of getting to zero, for example, on preventable maternal deaths, which is just there if we go after it together. So I think this is a stellar array of a thinking collaboration. And for me, that's one of the real positive things about the private sector, that you're bringing innovation, you're bringing the reality check, but really important for UNFPA, getting to scale. If we can help 100 women, why isn't it 100 million? When we know, for example, that 200 million plus are waiting right now today for me and you to do something about what should be simple: family planning access at her doorstep by her choice. Now, I think a lot of the understanding of what is remote is changing because of the types of activity that we're hearing described in this session today. I can be connected even in my island village. And also, as a young person, potentially, I can also understand that I can do things. This is the decade of action on the SDGs. Shout out to you for the pen again. And we wear it with pride, because we really want to do something. And I think for the young person to understand, I'm not a passive victim here. I'm a girl who is going to do what it takes where I am at home to solve some of these problems that are going to help me. Yes, they're going to help my family, my next generation, if you will, but it's also going to lead to that gender equality, which is a game changer for everyone. So really delighted to see this collaboration, but also the fact that you're setting the bar high. To get to zero, we actually mean zero preventable maternal deaths. We have the know-how, but it's really the social determinants of pulling it together. So I can't wait to hear from Temi on that story. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you, Natalia, so much. Natalia added, I think, a really critical element to the discussion, which is especially being at some place like Davos, that this is not going to be a top-down solution to a local problem, right? This is going to be people solving these problems for themselves, individual by individual, community by community, local small business, and local small enterprise by enterprise. And we want to get into that and make sure that's a real part of this discussion. I know there's so much other expertise in the room, so I wonder if we can take 2 or 3 comments, questions, if they can be fairly brief, to add to the discussion that we have today. I see one in the back and another one here in the front. And just tell us who you are and if you represent an organization, please.
My name is Simon Gupta. I work for Responsibility, a Swiss-based asset manager. I would like to add one point to this chicken and egg question between investor money, private sector money, and enough projects. We have made the experience that it is actually the piece in between which is the hardest. That is the product. That is the link, the bridge between the investors who look for solutions, and I guess that's the demand inside Credit Suisse and in other banks, and also the entrepreneurs who have these products. But this bridge building, the product, that is the key thing. And to make this a bit more concrete, last year we tried out something new, and we launched a CLO together with JP Morgan and OPIC, interestingly. And we inverted this usual first loss kind of structure where the government goes into the more risky junior piece and inverted that, and we had the private sector below. And that worked quite well. 175 million were raised. And that is the product solution, which is scalable because the CLOs can be traded on mainstream markets.
That's a collateralized loan obligation, right?
Exactly.
For those in the room who may not know a CLO.
But that is, I think, a very important detail to the discussion, what we have to think about, not only in microfinance, but also maybe in health and other sectors.
Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, you brought up development impact bonds before that take a while to produce, and the kind of the key thing everyone's shooting for is when you get these to be so simple, so plain vanilla, they can be like a product that your average investor can just invest in. I think we're quite a ways away from that on many of these counts. Maybe not at the large scale, but we'll talk in a second about smaller scale organizations.
Well, I mean, we work with Responsibility, and we have their funds on our platform, and I'm very familiar with that CLO. Congratulations on getting that done. But you know, we're also doing structures like that as well. And to your point, it's so critical because having creative asset securitizations or inverting your typical slicing of a capital structure, this all gets back to, we're starting to do this now. You know, we've launched very similar bespoke products this year, but it's just really the first year are doing this, and I think it's going to grow and grow and grow over time, and I'm excited to see what's coming up.
This is the reason why I tell a lot of people who are in university and want to do global health that they need to also become financial engineers.
Absolutely.
Because you need to understand not just how to slice the human body, but how to slice a CLO.
I won't touch the body.
Any thoughts on this before I turn back?
No, I think there was another question,
Yes,
and then
please.
I would like to make a point.
So I'm Sharia.
Just hang out. There's a mic coming for you, Sharia.
So I'm Sharia. I'm actually a surgeon, a trained surgeon.
There you
So
go.
I used to slice
Good
human
setup,
bodies,
yeah.
and now I try and figure out financial systems. No, I get very excited every time I attend these Devex events around finance and just seeing the progress over the years. Been following the work that you are doing together. I also think that, you know, the piece that's really missing is looking at that creative application of the different types of capital and instruments that are available to the market. Because ultimately, if we want to bring the private sector on board, regardless of size, they need access to working capital. They need access to scale, grow, et cetera, et cetera. Mission & Co., my company, were part of the private sector constituency of UHC 2030 together with MSD also. And it's very interesting how, just even in that grouping, by the way, that group has issued a private sector statement of the seven key promises of the private sector to deliver on UHC 2030. 2 of them are related to the topic of discussion today, business models, new business models, and the other is financing. But one other piece that I think the private sector can really do is, because the private sector has understanding and trust and an existing customer group already who are buying their products and services, I think they can actually create new partnerships between different businesses. I mean, this is done always, right? JVs and etc., where you bring in new products to serve a particular market that's already been served. So, for example, I know now in this relationship, you are funding Life Bank. Sorry, Timmy. But, you probably could unlock new markets for your company through her, rather than having this, relationship where you're giving money. You could actually create new opportunities. So, sorry, it's
a great point,
So I've been working with a group of individuals and governments that's funding this as part of the SDGs and Action Platform. It's called Health in Your Hands. So we are trying to figure this piece out too, and we really welcome partnerships. We're aggregating 100 business models and businesses that serve that last mile. We want to change the narrative from the last mile to become the first mile, because they're the most important. And we would love to hear from the panel, what you think about that approach, that, you're working together. It's not just I'm investing in you, but we're actually doing business transactions together.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot of applause.
So the other call to action is this is an alliance, and so we welcome anybody who wants to join. And I mentioned that part around matching, because as we've started this, there are failures in the pipeline. We know that there are innovators and entrepreneurs that we have no visibility around. And so to be able to partner around linking pipelines, around saying if any of the businesses in your portfolio would be eligible for mom's financing. I mean, those are the things that we want to do and have transparency around that. To your other point around strengthening, what I actually heard of as strengthening health systems. Part of the reason we're not reaching the last mile is because we have broken public health systems, public infrastructure. And if we can integrate with private infrastructure that helps to strengthen total markets, the woman at the end doesn't care whether it's coming from a private sector supply chain or a public sector supply chain. She just wants that life-saving product. And so this is, that long-range goal around how it is, whatever market you're in, wherever you are in the last mile, a life-saving innovation can get to you. So.
Thank you for that, and I know Natalia Khanum has to leave, so please join me in thanking her for her wonderful intervention. We have a couple more comments from the floor. I think you'd like to say something. Was there another hand that I missed as well? Sorry. Over here. Okay. And we'll just wait till a microphone is going to come your way. Our colleague from Quois Invest.
Hi. Yeah, Charles Jansen from Quois. So on broken health systems, I fully agree with you that the private sector can bring a huge amount of solutions. In our Health Quad, our Indian Healthcare Innovation Fund, we've been focusing on profitable, scalable businesses that could do just that. And that were one constituent to a piece of the broken system. And that has worked tremendously since so far the IRR of the first fund fully invested is 58%, and it's really targeted towards lower and middle income populations in India. But I think
just underline that for anyone who didn't quite catch, the return on that fund, which is investing in small scale Indian-based health innovators, is 58%.
Indeed, yeah.
Certainly, I think Dana.
That's a number that I always like to hear.
Go ahead, please.
And but hopefully people will stay for the impact
Yeah.
because that's the passion that's driving us, and that's the mission that we have. But we see that in the broken health systems, there are some parts of it that cannot be solved with single focused, profitable, fast-growing interventions. And that's where blended finance comes in. And that's where our blended finance work in healthcare access is focused. Because there we think that you need an intervention that goes from awareness to diagnostic to care and to potentially availability of drugs and then repeat care. So across the whole chain. And that when you manage to do that, and that you bring those pieces together, then the ecosystem can basically jump over a 5-year period what the ecosystem of public health would be left to do in 20 years if it didn't have the catalytic effect of all these parties coming together. And so the patience that sometimes is asked for those 18 months, we think is really valuable because you're going to gain probably 10 to 15 years in the fertility of that segment of the public health system, and you're going to be able to study it on database. And in order for that to function, you need these multi-stakeholder instruments because the governments, however well-intended some of their members may be, generally have very, very poor governance in those countries. They will at some point ask for bribes. They will at some point try to get something out of their private sector counterparties, who will then enter into a spiraling system of cutting corners, not delivering, and then the parties will be fighting against one another, saying that, and people will say, we just need to educate them on what are the outcomes wanted. It's outcomes that need to be predefined, but it's also needing to have a process that is on the table where the government might be one of the funders, but that there are other funders that are obliging them to the higher governance level and the shared higher mission.
That seemed like a pretty eloquent argument for multi-stakeholder
Yes.
alliances.
SDG 17?
Yes.
Yes.
Any response to that?
Yes. You know, I also think, and you know, you started to talk about the continuum of care, and what it made me think about is how we need to keep, in our case for MSD for Mothers, the mother at the center, and be able to follow her, not only through her pregnancy journey, but after that. Get her on a path to lifelong health and well-being. Get her family on a pathway to lifelong health and well-being. And we're hoping that through the Moms Initiative, we can invest in innovations that actually put moms at the center and include them in a digital ecosystem, include them in a financial ecosystem, so that they actually have the power to execute on choice if it is available. And so I'm really hopeful that, you know, with those types of guiding principles, we can have that impact.
I would actually just touch on, I think you talked on governance. Having quality in developing markets is so critical. And, you know, to have quality and still be profitable, there's two keys, and I mean, you know this, in the market that you're operating. You're lucky in that it is a high growing population.
You're talking about India.
I'm talking India or countries like India. And so to leverage that and have high volume operations enables you to keep your costs down and still have quality. I suspect that in part is driving some of your returns. It's, you know, the model goes wrong sometimes in public institutions where they say we're going to try and cut quality, or we're going to not make a high volume operation, and then it just ends up, you know, as you said, it circles over and over in a downward spiral. And having that bar for quality, accessibility, affordability in healthcare is just key.
I know we had one other comment here from the floor.
Yeah, Robert Greenhill with Global Canada and former Chief Business Officer of the World Economic Forum. I want to just touch upon the unintended consequences of the important role of the private sector, which is, given we're talking about public health, and we know from our own countries like Canada, is actually public sector-driven health with public leadership. And we know how important that is. So under the principles of the private sector, what role do we have in terms of the importance of public leadership, the importance of public funding, whether from domestic or international sources, and the way in which private sector intervention can help build rather than tear down public sector leadership? Because there is a danger that we have a lot of private sector interventions, each of which are good, but they actually suck away the great talent, the great surgeons who go there instead of being in the public sector, financing and ideas, and we end up undermining the integrity of a public health system. How do we balance that, and what role do organizations like yours play in that?
And just to add to Robert's excellent question, in many of the countries we're talking about, Kenya, India, and others, 2/3 of the health spend is out of pocket.
Yeah.
So there already is this very big private sector.
Even in the public sector, there's
it's out of pocket,
spending.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
You have to
given that,
slice
what
it
if-
country by country,
given that, is there some
effectively.
danger that we'll go so far in one direction that we never actually build the public health system that is required?
The Americanization.
I mean, what I would say, and this, again, our guiding principles as we think about this, and that's why it's a partnership, it's an alliance, it's not about replacing public sector by private sector. It's about integrating both so that, you know, wherever the woman is receiving her care, she's getting it at a high quality level, and thinking about a total market approach. You know, I think the reality in many of these markets, especially for young adolescent vulnerable girls, they're going to, you know, street sellers of drugs, and we have no idea what that quality is. And so another partnership MSD for Mothers is a part of is improving the quality of you know, the local private sector, formalizing it, integrating it into government accreditation schemes. So governments remain stewards, you know, of quality. We're doing this in India with local private maternity homes, local private, you know, physicians. And it's actually been really exciting to see that the private sector certification standards that the professional society has developed actually are now being replicated, or, you know, having aligned with the government of Maharashtra's public sector quality initiative. So now it's Manyata, Lakshka, public sector, private sector facilities in that state have aligned quality standards, and, you know, that work is being scaled up together. So that's our approach.
Well, we're going to turn now to a fantastic example of exactly what we're talking about. So I just want to see if you have a final thought from either of you before we move to our next segment of the discussion.
I just want to
today.
hear from Tammy.
Yeah, me too.
Okay,
Me
okay.
too. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists. And Temi, before you get up here, we've got a video presentation for everyone.
Hello, thank you for calling Light Bank. My name is Ojolape. How may I help you, sir?
Hello, good afternoon. This is Dr. George from Abosede Medical Center. If you have A negative, we need 6 minutes as soon as possible. The patient is in distress, please.
Nigeria has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, and this is mainly attributed to postpartum hemorrhage. Every hour, 10 African women bleed to death because their hospital cannot find the critical supplies they need to stay alive. And 90% of them can be saved with easy access to these supplies, particularly blood. I started this movement to attempt to rescue women across Africa. Life Bank is a medical distribution company. We like to call our system the 4Ds: data, discovery, delivery, and donors. First, we gather inventory information using our BankX system. Then we help hospitals find what they need using 3 methods. First, they can call into our call center, they can use our USSD platform, or our LabX, which is a kiosk in the hospital. Then we deliver using 3 methods. We can deliver via road using motorcycles, we can deliver on the water using boats, and we deliver in the air using drones. We deliver these supplies in the right condition and on time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are in the business of saving lives. We're building a movement of 1 million blood donors that will finally solve blood shortage across our communities. We are committed to innovating within the supply chain. First, we built SmartBag that brings transparency and accountability into the blood system. It's a blockchain technology that ensures the safety of the critical supplies we distribute. It gives hospitals access to all the details about the donation. Then we built Bolt that brings universal access to critical supplies for everybody. It allows the poorest people to have access to the critical supplies they need to survive. We charge $10 for every unit of products we move, and we have delivered over 19,000 units and counting. We have grown by 3x every single year since we've launched, showing that we're building something special. And we have the best chance of solving this problem across emerging economies. This problem exists all over the world. It is so important that we solve this problem once and for all.
Change our chairs. For you. Little stage setting. Please join me in welcoming Temi Giwa Tubosun, the Chief Executive of LifeBank.
Thank you for having me.
So it's a pretty inspiring thing to see that you're building. Give us the backstory. How did this get started?
Right. First, it started with winning a lottery. My mom won a lottery, and I got a chance. No, seriously, literally.
A real lottery, which is in the news today, by the way, this lottery. Tell them about which one you're referring to.
So it's called a Visa lottery. And basically, it's sort of, you just put your name in there. They just randomly select your name. And then you get to be Americans. So when I was about 10, my mom won this lottery. And by just selecting her name from millions of names from all over the world, I became an American. I got to study in the US, had an excellent education, went to a grad school in California where I was, encouraged, and we were all encouraged to go back, to our communities and try to solve the problems that exist in those places. So moved back to Nigeria shortly to do an internship. Met a young lady who had been in labor, very sad story. She had been in labor for a couple of days. The community was waiting for her to pack up, basically. And we just randomly went to that village, and I felt very taken by her story. It became sort of like an intellectual obsession. So I've had this passion for mothers since I was 23 years old. So very early before I actually became a mom myself. Then, I worked at WHO, here in Switzerland, worked in Uganda, UNDP, did a lot of work in global health, but sort of like always cared about mothers, but in sort of like an institutional way and intellectually. Then I became a mom 6 years ago. I have a little boy who's really fantastic. And I was very lucky to have him in the US, where I also had, surprisingly enough, a breech birth. But instead of waiting for 3 days, I got my emergency C-section in 26 hours, which, was a lot. But seriously, I didn't have to wait to die. And it's sort of a sign of, first, my privilege and my luck, but also a sign of responsibility to do this work. So something that was sort of like an intellectual passion became a personal one, an emotional one. Quit my very good job, which I was very good at, and decided to start.
We believe that.
I really was.
We do.
They didn't want me to go. But right, so I decided to do something about it. Went back home, talked to everybody who would talk to me. Basically went to Lagos, went to every hospital that would allow me to enter their hospital, just random strange person asking questions. What are your problems? Why are moms dying? I really wanted to know, of course I knew the intellectual reasons, but I wanted to know what their reasons were. And it was postpartum hemorrhage. That's what everybody said. These people have, they have baby, they bleed. And that was it. And I started asking, then I went to the blood banks. So why, how come, do you need donors? Should I do a donor platform? I actually started sort of like a foundation that would get people to give blood because I thought that was the reason why people were dying. But it wasn't. It was sort of like a market failure. By talking to blood banks, found out that, they have, excess storage. Sorry. They have excess storage. You had shortage with women dying from postpartum hemorrhage, and you had surplus with blood being discarded across hospitals.
So they were throwing away blood,
Yes.
perfectly good blood, because it expired.
Absolutely expired. They didn't know, the person who needed it didn't know that it was there. There was no discovery system. There was no, and even if they knew, how would they get to the hospital quickly enough?
Right.
So that was a problem that, I was like, this is it, I can do this. I have some experience in supply chain. And then I started LifeBank. But for me, I always knew, about a year before I started LifeBank, there was a big NGO that sort of did something very similar to what we did. And the NGO died. Not because they didn't have excellent people, not because they didn't do important work, but because their funder, was sort of tired of funding them. We had been funding them for 12 years, and then stopped, and that was it.
They had no business model.
They had no business model, so they were purely, grant capital funded. So I knew that was not going to be it. It had to have a business model, and for me also, I felt like it's important to verify if people actually wanted our services. And that, a good way to verify if someone actually wants what you're offering them is that they're willing to pay. Even if they have $2, they say it's $2 they have in their account, are they willing to give you 50 cents of that $2? That's a good, verification. That's a good way of knowing that you actually have a market and that people want to pay for your services. So since day one, LifeBank always had a business model. We required that, we're a B2B business, so we don't actually interface directly in terms of payment with the patient.
It's the hospital who pays you?
Yes. So the hospital pays us about $10. Some hospitals pay a lot more and demand more services from us, as high as $40, and some hospitals pay as low as $2. So we have sort of like a cross-subsidization system where we're reaching everybody at the point at which they can pay, and delivering these life-saving critical supplies around the clock.
So a couple quick statistics. If a woman today is bleeding after childbirth, during childbirth, she needs blood, how long before LifeBank can deliver her blood?
So 45 minutes today, which is still, which is something of pride for us. When we launched 3 years ago, we averaged 3 hours. It was really hard. We didn't know what we were doing. But by really, developing technology, we think of ourselves as a distribution business that is technology enabled. So we have technology for each part of what we do that makes it more efficient and makes it, more seamless. So by, deploying technology, deploying, hub and spoke model in certain places, in certain location, by adding, motorcycles and boats and all sorts of things, expanding our fleet, adding drones, we've been able to cut down that 3 hours to 45 minutes today.
How much? Yes. To date, how many women's lives have been saved?
7,000 and something and counting. So in our office in Lagos, we, because like I said, someone said earlier, come from the, you can come for the returns, but stay from the impact. For us, we're working to be towards profitability. We're a business. We care about scale. We care about all those things. We've, primarily been funded. 99% of all the, capital we've raised has been venture capital. So we've been sort of like in a traditional startup world. So people come for the impact, come for the returns, but stay for the impact. On the wall of our offices, we have the names of everybody we've saved, their first name, and we're really passionate about that. So as you're walking up the stairs, you see all these names, and it's really incredible to remind us of why we do what we do.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah. This event is, of course, focused on finance. So just tell us the story of how you got finance. You said it's traditional venture capital. What has that been like? How has that process gone to get finance to date?
Yeah, I mean, it's been something. First, we're a startup. We're in developing countries, emerging economy, and two, we're in healthcare. You know, something that 90% of venture do not understand. Not because they don't care, but they just don't get it. You know, I use this example. You know, if you're an adult person, you're in venture capital, you've had to book hotels, you know, you've had to get a taxi, you know, you've had to do that, but you've not been bleeding to death on a bed, you know, somewhere in a hospital. So you don't have an emotional connection to this problem. You don't even have an intellectual connection with the problem. So it's been really difficult. One thing we've been able to do is to focus on the profit, you know, the income, you know, the growth, you know, growing 3x year on year, the scaling, the growth, the opportunity. So they come for the opportunity, and we have those conversations. We've been able to raise about $600,000 in venture capital since we launched, from pre-seed to angel investment to seed. I've done everything. And so we've been able to sort of like develop the capacity to run these rounds and have this conversation about returns, but with the heart of it being impact.
When you think about an audience like this and the people following online who are in the global development, global health world, big institutions, is there anything they could be doing differently to help more entrepreneurs like you get going and get to the point you're at?
You know, I think, you know, anything in healthcare takes a while before the returns come. So you need some, you know, capital to absorb a lot of the length of time. It's not in any way, shape or form a money doubling activity. You know, you're not going to double your money in 12 months. But the impact is there and the returns is there. It's just longer term. So what companies like me and innovators on the ground, you know, who are doing the important work need is, one, access to the right kind of capital and scale. You know, the sort of expertise that you need to actually scale. You know, in the video I mentioned that this problem exists all over the world. You know, you find this problem in Africa, you know, in South America, you know, in Southeast Asia, everywhere you go. Any country that's not developed its infrastructure, you're going to find mothers bleeding to death or children not, you know, being able to find oxygen, you know, and dying of pneumonia. You know, people with diabetes, you know, going into shock and dying. You know, all sorts of, you know, supply chain issues, infrastructure issues that end up in someone dying, which is really, really the worst outcome. You know, so this problem exists, and when you find people who have solved it, it's important to scale the solution to everywhere, particularly people who are solving it sustainably, people who are solving it with, you know, the heart of impact. So when you have sustainability there in terms of a business model, you know, you have, you know, an agile system that can be scaled across the country, across the world. You know, you have, you know, you have impact there because, again, it's really critical for people to care. You know, the heart has to be part of it. So when you have all of those things together, it's important that the global health community comes and scale those sort of solutions. And you find that solution with all the, you know, all the issues that the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to solve. You find people who already solved it in a small way, but are not having the access to the capital. They don't get access to capital, like I mentioned. One, two, they don't get access to the right expertise to grow their management teams. You know, and they don't have access to the skills to really build a plug-and-play system. So what we need as innovators on the ground is those three things, you know. Access to being able to, you know, simplify your model and have a scalable model, capital, the right kind of capital, and the right management team, which I think it's one of the incredible things about the Moms Initiative, because all of those is part of the package.
Yeah. And what's exciting about this is, having interviewed and spoken with the leaders of many of the DFIs around the world, the development finance institutions, they say the same thing. I think there's starting to be real alignment about what's needed to help entrepreneurs on the ground.
Good.
Yeah, let's see where it goes. But I think there's at least alignment at that level. Now, we had a good question from Robert before about the public system versus the private system. What has your interface been like? How do you think about that question in the country where you work?
So the reality is women bleed in hospitals in the private sector. They bleed to death in the private sector. They bleed to death in the public sector, you know. So the problem exists across the entire health system. To me, I think I think it's not the right question to say, you know, which one should we focus on? You know, are we going to focus on the public sector or the private sector? I think it's important to center all this innovation, all this investment on the patient. You know, the patients are going to choose where they want to go to the hospital. What our job should be is make sure that whichever hospital she chooses to go to, whether it's public or private, whatever, it's critical to make sure that the level of services she gets there is high quality, it's accessible for her, and it's something that she can afford, right? So I think that's what's most important, centering all this debate on the patient and allowing them to choose as they will. And then with that choice, making sure that there is uniformity in terms of, you know, the quality of care that she can get, or that he can get, or that the baby can get in these institutions.
And so far, you have had no challenge working with public sector hospitals, private sector hospitals. That's not been an issue for your business at this point.
It is, you know, there is some, governments will government. So there will always be some, particularly because we're business and we have to charge, you know, them. So there's always some, reservation on the parts of, the government partners. But I think there are, more, perhaps this is a Nigerian thing, but increasingly there's a lot of, and I think it's also in Kenya with the NHIF, when you have an institutional payer, when you have like UHC payers, they are looking at solving problems and paying the right price. So if you come and you say, okay, I want to solve this problem, I'm going to pay this price. I'm cost effective. You can trust in my in the system I've built. Then there is an openness to actually pay for those services, either whether the patient goes to the public sector, hospital, or the private sector. And then in Nigeria, there's a lot of, public-private partnership within government hospital systems, where they're looking at, okay, we're good at delivering services, but we're not good at delivering blood, around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're not good at maybe cleaning our facilities, or we're not good at this. And looking at parts of the health systems they are not particularly good at, and actually having that be a PPP, with a private sector partner. And I think that's sort of changed our model slightly in terms of how we work with governments. When those things are happening, when there is a sort of like a private sector partner already within the hospital system, then it's easier to just say, okay, Life Bank, There's a big hospital in Nigeria called Lagos University Teaching Hospital, one of the largest in Nigeria. And we've been partners with them since we were 1 year old, which is really, really rare. And that's because the people there, the people who are building this government tertiary institution, understand that they know what they do well. They know what they're good at, which is actually delivering the care. But the services, to make sure that the care delivered is excellent, they know they're not very good at. They know they don't have the capital to invest in it, and therefore are willing to work with organizations like mine to actually, do that work.
I want to see if there are one or two questions for Temi here, but as you're thinking about those, one more question for you, Temi, which is, you talked about scale. So give us a sense across, if we were looking at a map of Nigeria, how much have you scaled at this point? And what do you think is the real scale opportunity for LifeBank?
I think the real scale opportunity is everywhere that women are still bleeding to death, everywhere that a child still dies because there's no oxygen in the hospital. That's our opportunity. That's where I need to go. That's where I need to be. And one of my challenges is to build a system that can actually scale to those places, and we've done that, and we'll continue to build that. I think, the other part of that is to say, in Nigeria, we've scaled to part of the scaling, part of the requirements to actually getting ready to scale is actually build the right thing, is to wait and make sure that you actually have, the right structure. You can move fast. If you move fast and break things, it's human beings you break. So it's critical that you don't move too fast and make sure that you've built something that is actually scalable.
This comes from someone who's actually met with Mark Zuckerberg.
And I believe in moving fast because this problem is hot and, we have to solve it. But I think there needs to be care, in how we scale. So one of the things we've done is we're about 3.5 years old. For the first 2 years, we were in one city delivering one product round the clock. And that discipline and that focus allowed us to actually build something that is scalable. So by not scaling quickly, we built something that is scalable because it allowed us to see all the problems that we may have in this supply chain and solve it and innovate it, which is where we got something like Smart Bag, because in Nigeria, between 2 and 8% of HIV cases in the country is still through the blood system.
2 and 8%?
Between 2 and 8%. So
wow.
Some data will say 2, government data, and private sector data will say 8%, some as high as 14%. So it's still a big problem on the continent, in developing countries where people are still being transfused, blood that are unsafe. So we now looked at, we know we have a moral responsibility, and we found that problem by being stuck in one place on purpose, by being focused and being disciplined and looking at all the problems in this chain, then innovating for it. So we built Smart Bag as a response to discovering that this is a big problem and we don't want to be distributing bad blood across the world. 2, we know that some people, no matter how much you try to help them, still can't pay for that $10, right? They still don't have that money. They don't have it. So then we developed something called BOAT, which is a Blood and Oxygen Access Trust, to make sure that there's a trust in place for people who absolutely cannot pay. The medical team would tell us, okay, this is a destitute patient. They cannot pay for your services. Then the fund pays for them. So we've been able to set up those 2 innovations. And then also, of course, our drone project as well. So we've set up all this innovation because we waited to scale, to really look at the problems we have in the chain and solve them before then being ready to scale. So
By the way, Lagos as a scale is probably bigger than many countries.
Right, it's 30 million people.
I think it counts as scale even in your first year.
And it has the 7th highest economy in Africa, so it's a big scale.
Yeah, it's a big scale even to start with. Are there 1 or 2 questions or comments for Temi? Well, let me ask while others feel free to think about more if you want. I've got plenty more for you. The question Tara brought up about privacy. Yeah. It's a real challenge, right? And as she said, there are many startups in the health space dealing with really personal private data. On the other hand, you're balancing that challenge against the reality of the need for a life-saving product like blood. How do you think about that? How do you decide how to invest between those 2 imperatives to grow and serve more women and to make sure you're doing it in a very safe way?
I think it's really critical. Personal privacy is it's important, particularly in healthcare. So one of the first things we do is we get only the first name. We care about our patient, but we know that we don't really need actually identifying. We need to know why they're sick, what they need. And we need to know their first name. We don't need to be able to actually identify them. So that was the first strategy, because we couldn't build the data, the privacy, infrastructure that would be needed. So we then decided to sort of stop ourselves from being able to identify who this woman is. So that was step 1.
Did you talk about this with Mark Zuckerberg when you had your meeting with him?
No, I think as somebody who has some experience with data, and who understands how the American health system works and why and data privacy is so critical, I think that was part of what the innovation that I was able to bring back to Nigeria, to say, okay, you don't actually want to know who this person is. Why do we need their phone number? Why do we need this? So we then deliberately made us blind to some information, in the chain. That's 1. 2, I think also being able to build this infrastructure it's investment. You need capital to actually build a fully data privacy, into this innovation. Yeah, and these are sort of the things that young innovators in developing countries don't have the capacity to really do. Right. You don't have that investment. You don't have that money. When you're trying to solve a problem with $50,000, and you have to keep the lights on, data privacy is the last thing on your mind. It should not be, but unfortunately, it is. So I think what's needed is that infrastructure. Things like perhaps it's, opening up, MasterCard's, infrastructure, data privacy infrastructure, and licensing that to startups so that they have that from day one. I think, but right now, when you're young and you're just starting out, it's sort of like you don't have that capital to invest in it.
Marianne?
I just wanted to say something to that.
I think there's a microphone that will come around to you, if you don't mind, just for the live stream. I know we can all hear you in the room.
I mean, part of why this is an alliance and part of why this is so exciting is, we want to be able to link LifeBank to those sorts of innovations that will help solve the problems that she's having, so she doesn't have to figure out how to do it herself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
One last question for you before we wrap up. Oh, we got one in the back. We'll take that last one. Oh, I'm sorry, you have a question too. We'll take them both. Keep them brief if you can.
Yes, I don't have a question actually, Simon Gupta, responsibility again, but more a call for proposals or great job, Timmy. Keep it up. If someone in this room or online has similar projects, we want to spend 150 million this year on health projects, and we're newbies in that sector, so please reach out if you have a bankable project with strong impact. We look for you and haven't found you yet.
And are you doing grants, loans, or equity? Just let us know what you're doing.
All of the three, debt is the core.
Okay. And one more comment or question here. Hang on one second. The mic is coming.
How can individuals in civil society support you?
I mean, one of the things that I love about this Moms Initiative is the expertise, right? We're a young team. We're very passionate. We work around the clock, and we've been working around the clock since we launched the business. So you can see that the passion is there. But I think one thing that's missing is that there's a polished expertise to really actually drive this thing and get across the world. So what we're looking for is, civil society, private individual. If you have some sort of, expertise that can help us, that can help this business solve the problem across the world, that's what we're looking for. So my email, please just shoot me an email. This is who I am. This is what I do. And of course, that's one of the things we love about the Moms Initiative as well, because it comes with that package.
So if somebody here is like a former executive at UPS,
please,
or FedEx, this is your new boss.
Yes.
Come work for Temi.
I'm really nice.
So Temi, just as we wrap up here, Zipline, as you know, from Rwanda, is a drone delivery company for blood. Now, they started in a different way. They started focusing on drones. They've become a unicorn, $1 billion company. I mean, it seems to me you're in a much larger market. What do you think is the potential opportunity for a company like LifeBank?
We're going to list this thing. I have big dreams in terms of the impact and in terms of the revenue and the potential for returns. My big dream is to actually have this company be listed and be, one of the few businesses with impact at the center of it, being, publicly, owned. So that's really critical. That's important. But I know we're still very far from that. That requires scale. So I see us. We're very passionate about what we do. We're a little bit competitive with our friends. But I think what's important for us is the fact that we're agile, we're cost effective, we're focusing on the last mile. And we're employing really low income people. They come to us as just, dropouts, and we work with them. They become, doctors on wheels or blood ninjas, like we call them, and they love what they do. They're passionate. And, we're providing jobs and prosperity to low-income people as well. So I think for us, those are the important things to take, those are the important differentiation. And then, also it's a model, they're a unicorn, we're coming up as well.
Exactly. Well, please join me in thanking Temi, Giwa, Kibosun. A fantastic, fantastic story. Thank you so much, Temi. Take that from you. And I want to ask Marianne if she might have a final thought she wants to share with all of us.
So what I actually want to share is the fact, similar to the group as responsible, we are going to be disseminating the MSD for Mothers Innovative Financing Report that contains within it a call for business proposals to seek financing from the Moms Initiative. The details of the eligibility and criteria are in that call for business proposals. And we hope that all of you that are listening, as well as all of you in the room, will spread that. But the other thing I'd also like to ask is, let's share our pipeline, and let's figure out where the best way to match innovators with financing and reduce those transaction costs. And I'm really looking forward to having this be a movement that gains more and more and more momentum. So thank you, Devex.
Let me just say that we've all heard the term, and please let's give a round of applause for Anne for that fantastic call to action. We've all heard the term decade of delivery or decade of action. This is what it looks like, right? It's uncommon partners coming together, figuring out a real plan, and actually getting to the stage of doing things, not just talking about them. Yeah. So I want to thank you on behalf of Devex, on behalf of all the partners who've been part of this initiative. Thank you for being here in the room, for joining us from around the world, and stay tuned. There will be much more to come from all of us.